Welcome to Hammer Down, everybody. I am elated today to be joined by Ben Gordon, who our friend Cassandra Gaines has called the smartest man in freight. Ben is the CEO and managing partner of Cambridge Capital, where he has basically been a kingmaker in the industry. He's also the host of the BGSA conference each year, where freight's elite gather together to talk about everything in the industry. And he sits on the board of companies like Everest Transportation, Parcel Perform, um, Reverse Logistics, and Greenscreens.ai. Ben, welcome to the show.
Mike, great to be with you. Thank you.
The most interesting thing, Ben, is one, we're not going to talk about any of that stuff, which is a little strange to me. And then two, as a fun story, I'm going to work really hard to not make a Flash Gordon joke here, because the folks that might not know this, Ben is a marathon runner, and at TIA, I was out really huffing and puffing out for a run, and I hear, "Hey, Mike," and I see this flash go by me, and it was one of Ben Gordon here.
Well, we all have different skills. I'm sure you could beat me in a push-up contest or lots of other things, but the running thing I got down.
Gotcha. So Ben, one of the most interesting things that I've seen out of you in the past couple of years, and this really started when Russia invaded Ukraine, was that you've leveraged this amazing network and the opportunities and all of the companies that you've met along the way in order to become really kind of a pioneer when it comes to humanitarian aid in countries where that's necessary. Can you talk a little bit about what was the genesis for that? What was the thought process? How did you really become sort of a leader on that side as well?
Well, I don't know if I'm a leader, but I'm certainly trying to do my best to help. And I think it really just comes down to the fact that I think we all have been lucky, whether we recognize it or not. The fact is that, those of us who had the privilege of being born in America, were automatically born with a leg up on people born in any other country in terms of the opportunities that we have, in terms of resources, financial and otherwise. And I think that comes with the obligation to use that opportunity, use those resources in order to do the best and be the best that we can. There's a line from the Bible, from the sayings of the fathers, the Pirkei Avot by Hillel, and he says, "When a man is needed and there is no man, strive to be that man." And uh, aside from the gender-specific language, which I'm sure somebody will, I'm getting beat up on Twitter freight right now because somebody uh, took my line about our conference having the best and brightest CEOs in supply chain and said that it's not diverse enough, and it's not, by the way, but that's a function of the industry more than it is anything else. So anyhow, I'm simply giving a literal quote of the biblical words, and it says, "When a man is needed and there is no man, strive to be that man." Well, what does that mean? It means that when there's a need, you step up. You don't look around. You don't pass the buck. You say, "What can I do to step up and do my part?" So a year and a half ago, actually more than a year and a half ago, on February 24th of 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine and launched rockets, missiles, and all kinds of hell on the poor people of Ukraine, we all saw the headlines and we all saw how terrible it was. I had maybe a little bit more reason to care because we had bought a logistics company, Everest, that had about 200 people in Ukraine. And my first thought was I want to make sure that the people at Everest are safe, and so got involved in evacuating people, whether to the west of the country, to Lviv, or out in Poland or Hungary or elsewhere. And then the next question was, okay, it's not just about 200 people that work for Everest. It's also the millions of people whose lives are being shattered. And what do we do about that? And the great thing about our industry, Mike, as you know, is supply chain's full of good people who care and have the capacity to do good things. And my thought was, let's go out to other people that want to make a difference and want to use their capabilities and talents to help and create a supply chain network. And so we started something called the Ukraine Logistics Coalition and basically worked with transportation companies to provide free transport, medical companies to donate medical supplies, and then groups on the ground that had critical needs. And so we were able to bring in over $20 million of medical supplies last year to help support, field hospitals and other massive on the ground needs. And so it's really a testament to the fact that any one of us, given the opportunity, can make an impact. It's just a question of, do you take the time to do it? Do you make it a priority? And do you focus on follow through?
So, Ben, lots of us in logistics have seen kind of what it's like to deliver, maybe during bad weather. What are some of the things you picked up along the way in a place that was quite frankly, quite literally raining missiles here?
Yeah. Yeah. So a few things. So one thing that you don't always think about, or at least I don't always think about in classic supply chain arenas, you assume that you can count on a variety of things. You assume that when something gets delivered, there's some verification that it got to the right place. You assume that the roads are open. You assume that the planes, trucks, and railroads can operate. You don't know, as is the case in Ukraine, whether first of all you can't land a plane in Kiev anymore because it's not safe. You got to fly to Poland, Krakow or Warsaw, and then typically truck in. You don't know that the railroad system could be bombed by the Russians, in which case, that's not reliable. And then you also don't know that the truck deliveries are necessarily going to get where they're supposed to get because you just don't have the same level of infrastructure, at least not right now, that A, you do in the US or Europe, or B, you might have had in Ukraine prior to Feb 24. So how do you deal with that? Well, first of all, you've got to figure out, you work backwards from the goal. So if the goal is, I want to save as many lives as possible, one of the best ways to do it is medical supplies. And so that means, how do I get medical supplies to these field hospitals that are being set up? And so that means you work backwards from that. Number one, who are some field hospital organizations that I know I can trust and count on, that if we deliver medical supplies, they're going to be handled properly. And so found some organizations that do that. JDC, for example, which does a terrific job. Secondly, we figured out, okay, what are the things that they need the most? And so we came up with a list in partnership with the Ukrainian Ministry of Health and then the field hospitals and other organizations that we were working with. Then the third question was, how do we get the things that are on this list? And I'll just give you an example. One thing that people really need are first aid kits I mean, of course, it's not just the risk of being attacked by a Russian missile, it's the risk that you get injured and you bleed out because you don't have access to the medical supplies that you need. Something as basic and simple as the first aid kits that any fire station or police station in the US is typically equipped with, getting more of those out to people in need and front lines makes a huge difference. Well, it turns out that not all first aid kits are the same. First aid kits that typically are in the highest demand, ironically, of course, given what else is now happening, are the first aid kits in Israel. Why? Because Israel has had a long history of having to respond to terror attacks, whether by Hamas or Hezbollah or otherwise. And so when there's a terror attack in, say, Jerusalem, you want first aid kits that can go on the back of a motorcycle, that can get through narrow streets quickly and get to the people that need them quickly, be easy to use, and take care of the problem. So actually, getting those first aid kits to Ukraine ended up being the thing that consistently people have asked about and wanted the most. So it's getting what they need, and then lastly, it's the transportation. Once you know where's it going, who needs it, what's the stuff, can you get it donated? Then there's the question of the logistics part. How does it get there? And so if that was being originated in the U.S., you've got a multimodal move. Turns out there were a lot of trucking companies willing to donate the trucking capacity. Biggest expense, of course, the air side. Turns out that there were air bridges that other groups have helped set up going from JFK to Warsaw. And then the last mile, the trucking from Warsaw to wherever in Ukraine it was going. And if the freight was originating in Israel, same idea, but just different OD pairs. So either way, the figuring all that out. I mean, look, I'm not a freight forwarder, right? I mean, I've started a string of logistics, supply chain, and technology companies, and I run Cambridge Capital. We invest in companies in supply chain, but nobody would confuse me with being a freight forwarder who excels at managing that, and I shouldn't be managing that, but having other people that could help with that was important. But you got to understand what's the need and what you're trying to solve before you could pick your partners to do that. So really putting all that together, with some other terrific people and partners, Vlad Bilanovsky, who's chief execution officer at WiseTech, James Gagne from Seco, among others, some of the people that have been very helpful, and great to see other people in supply chain step up.
So Ben, if we fast forward just a little bit from February 24th to October 7th, you've stood up something very similar in order to support Israel. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Unfortunately, as you note, October 7th is a day that will live in infamy. October 7th, of course, was the day that Hamas, with help from Iran, organized a massive terror attack on Israel, murdered 1,400 people, including Israelis, Americans, people from close to 30 other nationalities, kidnapped approximately 240, and really, on a per capita basis, this is 20 times worse than 9/11 was for us as Americans, because for Israel, a country that's so much smaller, a country of 9 million, to have 1,400 people murdered in a day. It was the worst day in Israel's history. Um, and not just terrible for Israel, not just terrible for America and for the close to 30 other nations who had people slaughtered by Hamas, but really, if you think about it, our civilization, our Western civilization, is based on the idea that we can protect our civilians, that massacring women and beheading babies and raping young girls, like things that worse things than I ever imagined, were things that I saw, and anybody can see now on the internet, reflecting the barbaric terrorism inflicted by Hamas. And so, look, my first reaction, of course, was shock at how much evil there was, and then my second reaction was, we got to do something about it. And just like with Ukraine, I think when, again, the saying, when a man is needed and there is no man, strive to be that man. So what does it mean? Well, in Israel, I think it's very much the same situation as in Ukraine, which is you have innocent civilians being targeted, being butchered, and in need of help. And so what can we do to help? Well, I think, as with Ukraine, one is money. I got involved in donating and raising money as I did with Ukraine, and there are lots of wonderful groups on the ground. The Joint Distribution Committee is one, which also had terrific operations on the ground in Ukraine, and is doing terrific humanitarian life-saving work in Israel. For example, the populations in the south of Israel that are under rocket attack from Gaza, and of course the shock and horror of having entire communities destroyed. Uh, JDC has helped to evacuate those entire communities, move them to somewhere safer, and frankly, not just take care of their basic needs, but also the psychological trauma that, I mean, you can only imagine what it must have been like for people to see their entire community slaughtered. So JDC doing great work. United Hatzalah, which is an organization that operates their ambulances on motorcycles, so they can get quickly in and out of difficult places. Again, delivering first aid kits and other vital supplies, vital needs. So I got involved in both donating my own money and then helping raise money from others to support worthy organizations. And then the same supply chain idea, helping to get medical supplies into Israel, helping to get transportation companies and medical suppliers to donate both the lift as well as the supplies in order to get there, in partnership with groups on the ground. And um, it's terrible to think that everything that we did with Ukraine last year, we now have to do, not just with Ukraine, but also with Israel now. But unfortunately, that's the world that we live in. And my personal view is that what we do now could make a huge impact on what unfolds. And I don't want to be one of those people that is asked by my kids and grandkids, what did you do during a horrible time of need? An answer that, well, I was too busy, or I was too busy at work, and I wrote some things on the internet, but didn't actually do anything. I didn't want that to be me. And so I'm just trying to do my best alongside lots of other people that have shared values.
Ben, when it comes to supporting the cause and supporting the initiatives you're working on, obviously donations welcome, I assume, whether that's financial, whether that's actual, healthcare equipment, whether that's even transportation costs. What else can people be doing to support you?
Yeah, so I'd say four things, and I'll start with the ones that you mentioned. For sure, one is money. I'm not raising money for anything that I'm personally doing, but I'll tell you the organizations that I'm supporting. I mean, I named two of them. One I'm on the board of because I really believe that they are such a tremendous and well-run organization. The JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee. JDC has been around since 1914. It is really it's the largest American Jewish humanitarian organization. It does non-sectarian work as well. I mean, for example, a lot of the work in Ukraine, goes to help people regardless of, race, religion, ethnicity, or anything else. But it has been known as the Jewish 911, the first call when there's a disaster or a calamity. Again, dating back to 1914 when the Ottoman Empire crumbled and Jews were being slaughtered in what was then called Palestine, and the JDC emerged as a safe haven to help take care of people. So JDC is doing tremendous work on the ground. They have just about the lowest overhead percentage of any nonprofit out there. So you can feel good that the money goes to places that make maximum impact. And certainly that's one. United Hatzalah, as I mentioned, is another. So there are a set of groups that you can support, and certainly, again, those are two that I've written meaningful checks to, myself recently. The second is if you're in transportation and you're willing to donate transportation resources, the plane component is obviously the most expensive, so that's great, but the truck on either side matters as well. So donating truck or plane capacity, whether you're a freight forwarder or air cargo company or otherwise, great. Third is access to supplies. This is critical. Um, Medical supply companies, like Medline, or hospital companies, big hospital chains, HCA or others that, Tenet, that have access to the vital supplies that are needed, tourniquets, bandages, first aid kits, stents. I mean, the whole, anything you can imagine that a field hospital needs, there's a vital need for that as well. And then the fourth has nothing to do with money or resources, but it's the one thing that we all have, which is our voice. Speak up. I think it's just incredibly important to speak up. I think you look at what's happening in the world right now, and as the saying goes, for evil to occur, it's not enough uh, for I'm going to mangle the quote. It's not just about what bad people do; it's whether good people speak up. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to speak up, and again, regardless of Jewish or Christian or Muslim, we should all be able to agree that beheading babies is evil, that raping young girls is evil, that murdering Holocaust survivors is evil, and that re- regardless of what one's political opinion is and what one thinks about, one political leader or another, and Bibi Netanyahu or anybody else, the issue right now is, can innocent people, can civilians in Israel be allowed to live a life free of terror, of murder? And can Hamas, which is terrorizing not just the people of Israel, but also the people of Gaza, be removed from that position of threat? And there's plenty of time to talk about politics and things that we can debate, but hopefully that's something that civilized people around the world can agree on, and just use your voice to speak up and express that. And so in my mind, those are the four critical things: donating money, donating transportation, donating medical supplies, and using your voice as a factor for good.
Ben, one of the tenets of this podcast is kind of encouraging young and recent college grads to consider a role in supply chain on the humanitarian front. So not supply chain focused, but on the front that we're talking about today. What's the speak up, obviously, and we've touched on this before. What's the advice you would give a recent college grad in terms of learning about what's happening in the world, learning about where supply chain fits into that, but also really having an informed opinion as to how to react to what we're seeing, which is kind of a tough thing to learn to how to react to.
Yeah, I mean, It's a great question, Mike. I think no, number one is get educated, but I have to say something about that. Um, my opinion on this has changed. My opinion, if you'd asked me a year and a half ago about Ukraine, I would have said, get educated, read the New York Times. Uh, and when I've watched what's happened in the media this past month, I'm not sure that's the answer anymore. I mean, just as an example, 3 weeks ago, there was a terrible story about a hospital in Israel, and the headline in the New York Times said that Israel had launched rockets against the hospital to blow it up and murdering over 500 people. And there was all kinds of uproar. There were riots on the streets throughout the Middle East. Synagogues were burned to the ground in multiple places. There were synagogue firebombs and burnings in Tunisia, Algeria, Berlin. Um, and there was only one problem with the story, and that is that it wasn't true. Turned out that the bomb, it was actually a rocket launched by Islamic Jihad. Turns out that of the Hamas and Islamic Jihad rockets that they've been launching from Gaza against Israel, something like 15 to 20% of them are a misfire, and they end up blowing up uh, Palestinian people in Gaza. And so that was one of those rockets that the Islamic Jihad launched. And by the way, it didn't hit the hospital; it hit the parking lot. And by the way, it didn't kill 500 people; it was like some fraction of that. So like everything about the story was wrong. But guess what? You could publish a corrected headline the next day, but you can't walk back the rage that it unleashed. And so I guess I come back to the fact that I think my number one piece of advice is get educated, but how do you do that? Look, I think there are a number of good sources of more objective information on what's really happening. I think Barry Weiss, who used to be, and actually ironically on the op-ed page of the New York Times and quit because she didn't like the bias, started a publication called the Free Press. And I think she's done a very good job of which she's published on that. Also, while we're on the New York Times topic, Brett Stevens has been I think a very thoughtful analyst, just covering what's happening and what lies underneath that. So I'd say Barry Weiss, Brett Stevens is two high quality sources. Interestingly enough, there's a guy who's known as the Green Prince, who is the son of the founder of Hamas, who was raised to believe all the evil, hatred, and murder that's part of the Hamas death cult. And then he came to see that it was wrong. And he now goes around, of course, great risk to his own life, speaking out about what he actually knows and saw and experienced inside Hamas. So the Green Prince would be a third. But I think, look, getting educated about what's happening is important. That's not a political commentary. It's just like get to understand the facts and get to understand what's really happening there. I think the second thing is find a way to get involved, find a way to do something constructive. I mean, when I was when I graduated from college a long time ago, 28 years ago, I think the I actually thought about joining a nonprofit, before going into business. And the great thing about being in your 20s is you can go anywhere and do anything. You don't yet have the commitments that come with having a family and everything that flows from it. So it's a pretty good time to think broadly. Whether it's get involved as a volunteer or actually go work for a nonprofit or a humanitarian organization. There are wonderful, interestingly enough, humanitarian organizations in supply chain. Airlink, for example, is one, and it's one that we worked with the Ukraine Logistics Coalition to help airlift medical supplies into Ukraine. And I'd be happy to share suggestions with anybody that's thinking about those questions of, well, if I'm a young adult, young professional, and want to get involved, whether that's as a volunteer or on a full time basis. There are lots of wonderful people doing wonderful things that are focused on that important question that you asked.
Ben, is there any question I haven't asked you so far that I should have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question you haven't asked is, you know, how do you make sense of this all? Because it can be so overwhelming, right? I mean, if if you have empathy for the pain and suffering of people who are in need. I mean, look, you can look at all kinds of horrible things happening in the world. Look at the, I think, 1.7 million um, Afghanis who are being kicked out of Pakistan right now, where they had fled after the Taliban took over, and Pakistan is sending them back, which no doubt will lead to the certain death for many of those people, and that's heartbreaking. Nobody's speaking out about that. And so, look, if you look at all the terrible things happening in the world, there's a lot to be upset about. And the obvious question is, what can I do? I'm just one person, and how do I triage all these terrible things? And my answer to that question, Mike, is you can't do everything, but you got to do something. So start somewhere. And for me, that answer started with Ukraine last year because it was such an overwhelming need, and also because I'd seen up close and personal what people of Ukraine were like through my time visiting them, visiting the Everest transportation business there, and knowing that these were good people, these were honest, hardworking people, these were people that loved being a part of an American company, loved the fact that they felt like they were moving away from something bad, the oppression of the Soviet Union, and towards something good, the freedom and democracy and human rights of the West. And so I felt an obligation to do that. Now, in choosing that, it also meant that there were a lot of other things that I didn't do and can't do. But so, like I said, you're not obligated to do everything, but you got to start somewhere.
Ben, thank you so much for joining me today. Really, I can't appreciate your time anymore. Thank you so much.
Mike, thank you. I appreciate it. I value what you're doing. Value the spotlight that you're shining, not just on supply chain, but also on these important issues. And keep up the great work.